We go. I'm happy to see everybody today. We're happy to have Alice Elliott Dark with us. You know, she's written a lot of books and things, and a couple of her novels, and then two of her books were short story collections. And then in addition to that, I think she's had all sorts of things published in magazines all over the place. So and other kinds of publications. We're awful happy to have her with us. The thing we're hopefully going to discuss today with Alice is Fellowship Point, but I'm sure she's got lots of other things she can talk to us about too. Alice, you've been writing, I think, for a number of years, haven't you?
I've been writing since I was about 7.
Oh,
So yes, a number of years, I would say.
great. When did you first get published?
I probably got published in my, I got published in like school literary magazine and school newspaper when I was a teenager, but outside of the small world and the larger world in my 20s.
All right. So it has been quite a while. Yeah.
Yes.
As
Yes.
opposed to somebody like me who writes like crazy and never even tries to get published. We won't talk about that anymore.
No, I think I would like to talk about that because I
Oh,
think
really?
I think that's totally legitimate. And, I teach writing and I teach it as a practice, a life practice that it can be very separated from the world of publishing. I don't think the two have to go hand in hand at all. I think just writing is very, very contemplative and good for the world. So there you go.
Wonderful. Very encouraging. Thank you.
You had 20 years between books, so you're living that
True.
story.
Yeah, I write a lot of things that I don't publish and that I don't, I write as a practice. It's just the way some people are runners, or some people have, a lot of people are runners who never do a marathon. It's just like the way they enjoy spending their time. It's a contemplative practice or a discipline practice or something. So I think of my writing that way too. And sometimes I lift my head up and look around and go, oh, maybe I should publish something, but it's not the reason I do it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything from your writing life that has stood out to you? I mean, you won some awards and you've been placed in some very prestigious magazines and things. Is there anything that you felt really proud of that you have done?
Well, it really is, I've enjoyed all of those things, and what it does is, it brings me in contact with people I would never otherwise meet. Like, for example, all of you right now.
Mm-hmm.
People write me letters about my books and stories, and those are very meaningful to me. I love to hear how someone has responded, not just to the writing of the book, but to some aspect of it that they really connect with. That's usually what makes people want to pick up the pen and write to me. And that first happened when I published a story called In the Gloaming, which was about a young man going home to his parents' house when he had AIDS and he was dying in the 1980s. It was published in the early 90s. And I got a lot of letters from people who had had a similar experience to the mother in the story, but also a lot of people who wrote to me and said, oh, that made me pick up the phone and call my father. I haven't talked to him in 10 years, or, just to have like sort of hear from people who something has meant something to them that reaches them so deeply that they want to do something powerful like that. So I think that's probably the most meaningful thing to me, in terms of what's happened from publishing.
That's wonderful. I kind of had a feeling you were like that just because of your writing. And there's kind of a, most authors really do leave a sort of a soul print or a heart print on their work, and you can kind of tell where they're coming from, and the fact that you accepted coming here and talking to a small group. I mean, I warned her folks that the group was small, and she said, "Okay, no problem." So here she.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I mean, I feel very touched and honored that you want to spend time talking to me. So,
Wonderful. Well, how about we talk a little bit about Fellowship Point? It's something 20 years to get it back. It was published last year, and I remember that I did a review of it, and so it's one of those books that has had so many people, whether they've been authors or publications or professional reviewers or just fans who have reviewed it. And I have to tell you that one of the things you were saying about people having a different response, I read several different summaries and reviews from people, and it's interesting that some of them pointed out things from the book that others did not. One just this morning I was reading was pointing out about, oh, help me with the main character, not Polly, but Agnes.
Agnes.
And having the diagnosis of cancer. The one person mentioned that right off the top, and the other person didn't bring it up at all. And I thought, well, this is fascinating, the different ways that people view. Have you noticed that things that you've looked at, people do pick up differently?
Well, I haven't looked at very much, to tell you the truth. I think there's a lot of reviews on Goodreads, and there's a lot of reviews on Amazon, and I don't think it would be good for me to read them. They're really not written for the authors. They're really written for other readers and buyers. Every so often I look, and actually I've picked up a couple of good things from them when I have looked, but no, I don't read them, but I did read my reviews that were in magazines and so on.
Okay. Well, that's fair. Fair dinkum, as they say, and down in Aussie land. I don't know what that means, but I love it. Anyway, well, this is a large book, very big, and it's spread out. There's a lot of secondary characters. That is interesting. It must have been very difficult to sort of tell that story and manage to hang on to all of that.
It was. It was. I mean, it took me some doing to figure it out, and I started it in 2011, and I'm a professor at Rutgers, so I really found that I could not work on it during the semesters because I needed my full attention to be in this book because there are so many plot lines and characters and so on. And, I'm very busy in the semester doing my teaching and all the stuff you have to do at a university. But I would forget so much between, let's say, September and December when I would pick it up again. It was hard to keep track. It was hard for me to write good enough notes to myself that when I picked it up again, I even remembered. So yeah, it was a chore, but just figuring out all the plot lines. I never really had a good diagram or anything. Some people are good at diagramming everything, but I would just write a list of what I thought was happening. And then I didn't really refer back to it, but just by writing the list every so often, it would move me forward. But yeah, I mean, it was a challenge because I started out as a poet when I was young. I didn't write prose till I was 30. And I never in a million years thought I would write a big book. It if you had told me when I was young that I was going to end up writing a book like this, I wouldn't have even believed you. But it got to a point where I wanted to try and learn this form, which I think of as like a 19th century novel type form, and to learn subplots and how subplots worked with the main plot and all of those things, which I think is just fascinating and sort of miraculous. How it's like a big puzzle, you know, it's like a big puzzle, and I really wanted to see if I could learn how to do it. And I learned a lot about it. I mean, you know, when I look at other writers who work in this form like Trollope or something, I'm just like, I don't know how. I don't know how he wrote book after book after book after book like this. It's just miraculous, but it was fun to learn and to figure it out.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding that this is based on a real location and possibly some real people at some stage. Is that true?
No, it's really a totally made up location and totally made up people.
Really? Wow.
It's
Wow.
it's completely invented. Yeah. I
Well,
mean,
you
it is
fooled a lot of people.
Philadelphia, it is Maine. So the terrain is the terrain of those places, but Fellowship Point is a made up place and people are all imaginary people.
Uh-huh. Mhm. That's amazing because I keep seeing references to the history and when the fellowship was set up and back in the Quakers and all of that. So that's all totally fictitious, huh?
That's fictitious. Yes.
Wow,
I
that's
mean,
amazing.
that part took me a long time to work out.
Well, you
You
did
know,
a good
I was
job.
working out the background and I was working out the legal aspects of of how they sort of did the fellowship and the trust,
Mhm.
how the trust was passed down. That was just a lot of research. And, you
Yeah.
know, I wanted to write about something like a utopian community. So I read a lot about different utopian communities, early American utopian communities, which I just love and find completely fascinating. So, you know, I was inspired by things like that. I was inspired. I There's the one Shaker village, not the one near Lenox, but one on the New York border, which hasn't been made into sort of a tourist attraction. Or it's just like it's such a fascinating lifestyle. And of course, Shakers didn't last. I think there's one left.
Oh.
But the Quakers are thriving. And yeah, so those, you know, those kind of things were real, but the people are made up. I know a couple of people have said to me they know who Agnes was based on, and I said, well, you know, if you're getting in my brain, but great, but she just is made up.
Well, I have to say this again. You did a great job because you won't believe how many people out there are talking about this history and the place from 18 something, 1892 or whatever. I mean, they're totally going with it and they're putting it all
Oh,
over
really?
the
That's
place.
funny. That's funny because that's all made up. I mean, I did do a lot of research into 19th century business practices in Philadelphia, and I gave those brothers sort of a, you know, different points of view on business. You know, one brother, the one who's the founder of Fellowship Point, he likes the Philadelphia system, which is small factories, each one contributing. Like, let's say it's a rug, you know, there's 4 or 5 factories, one's a dyer, one's a wool, and that's very different in Philadelphia really than it was anywhere. And he thinks that's good because it can help people rise up. They can, you know, they can come to own their little factory, which is what happened. Then the other brother's like, no, let's consolidate everything into one big factory, which is what ended up happening. But, you know, that was all research and that I found out, and I thought it was all interesting. So I gave that history, real history to these brothers, but they're just made up. And the fact that they have different points of view on the business all that's made up.
Wow. Well, you did a darn good job.
Thank you.
Before we open it up for everybody to just ask questions and make comments and all that, some folks have read the book and some have not. Some of them were doing this and they're going to want to read the book. See, that's the whole point. So, first, I wondered though if we could talk a little bit about themes. There are lots of themes in this book. I was promoting it personally as one that, because I'm an environmentalist, and I had sort of been saying that this is about preserving things. I'm someone very concerned about climate breakdown and change, and so these things were on my mind, and I assumed they would be on others as well. But there are also themes about friendship, about family, and obligations, loyalties, all those. Did you choose certain themes, or did you just find them coming out, or what do you think is most important? Maybe
I think I think certain things arose, and then I realized that's what I really want to write about. I did always, well, the characters came first, but once I had the idea of Fellowship Point, of an actual place, then the theme of land ownership and conservation became very, very central to me. And when I think of the book, I think that that's the center of the book. A lot of people tell me they think the center of the book is about long-term friendship, and that's definitely a big theme of the book. But that I didn't focus on in the same way that I focused on the idea of land ownership and the other, and conservation, because I set it at a certain period, and William Lee, the founder of the Point, he goes and hears Thoreau with his father, and he hears Thoreau say, because he said this at the Athenaeum in Philadelphia, that Maine's the only wild place left on the East Coast. This was in 1854, I think. And that immediately made him want to go to Maine and to see what this was like. It wasn't quite as wild as Thoreau was depicting it, but and the timing of the book really follows the timing of the modern conservation movement. It's all happening as they're moving through it along with a lot of the big thinkers on the subject in the late 19th century and then through the 20th century. So that was very much on my mind. And also, I would say that when I was a child, I was unable to comprehend land ownership as the way people live. I just couldn't grasp that there are invisible lines that you're not allowed to cross. When you see like grass, and then no, that's their grass, this is my grass. I just thought, well, that makes no sense. So when I learned it at school early on that Native Americans had a very different understanding of how people lived on the land and how territories worked, that was very attractive to me. So I was thinking about all of those things quite centrally, and how these, earlier ideas about conservation and environmentalism were going to move into the future differently than they were in the past. This is like a concept of rich people buying land and taking care of it. That's sort of an older model, obviously, which led into the national park model. And, things have been evolving, but I was definitely thinking about all of those things. And just not wanting to be prescriptive at all, because I don't really think novels are written to be prescriptive, but just to raise these questions and have people reflect in their own arenas and lives what they themselves think about these questions.
Mhm. Wonderful. Well, again, you did a grand job on this book, so something to feel good about. A lot of
Thank you.
people have enjoyed it, and I'm sure a lot more people are going to enjoy it in the future. If you want to get, I think we have a few enough people that we should be all right just opening it up for conversation. If it gets kind of lumpy, we might have folks take turns, but otherwise, go ahead and if you have something you want to say, Susan, you've kind of got your fingers up there. You want to say something, you're muted, so that's, there
Yes,
you go.
It's very, very much a pleasure of mine to meet you. I think the thing that really struck me about this novel was the way that it unfolded, that I had no concept about what was coming next. It really, there were so many surprises all the way to the end, and I like the going back and forth between the letters to Elspeth and the introduction of Maud into the whole. I mean, it was just, I thought it was brilliantly done and very much enjoyed it. And I think the best part about it, so many times, you read a book and you know the ending before, right from the beginning, but there was no way that I knew what was coming in this. And of course I did get very interested in the friendship part, but it was delightful. And I thank you very much for writing it.
Oh, thank you so much. That's interesting to me, to hear about how it was unpredictable. And I think a lot of that came because it was not predictable to me either. I didn't really plot it all out, especially the ending. I had an ending, and I had it, even into when the book was first set into pages, first set into print at the publisher. And then I said, that's not the right ending. I have to change the ending. So, and that was about 30 pages. It wasn't just the very ending. It was, quite a bit of the ending. And so when I went in to write what is the current ending in the book, I was really winging it. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen to the land. I didn't know what was going to happen with Agnes and Polly and how their friendship would turn. I didn't know any of that. So it just happened for me. Like the solution, I won't tell what happens to the land if as a spoiler, but that came to me as I was writing it through Agnes, as she was going through that process and suddenly having a moment of like, oh, of course, this has been staring me in my face my whole life, and now I get it. That just came spontaneously in writing it. So I think I was able to preserve my own my own path of surprise, and that's why it has that quality.
Great. That's great. For those that, one second, Kathy, just for those of you who haven't read it, what we have here is a book about, just short synopsis. Two women who have been pretty much friends for life. They're now in their 80s, and they're living in a community that has, I can't remember what it's called, but they have an agreement in the community, and they're concerned, at least Agnes particularly is concerned, that when they die, or that they're going to lose control of this, and something, the land may no longer be protected. Matter of fact, there may be a huge development of what do you call those things, Alice? A resort.
a resort marina, like there's a man looking at this beautiful point of land in Maine as a perfect marina resort.
Mhm.
And Agnes hears this and she's like, okay, we've got to settle this now, because she's been thinking for a long time about a land trust or something, for various reasons that you learn in the book, that it's come down to the point where she can't just take it for granted that the land is going to be preserved. This is sort of a pivotal moment in the future. So that is like a big part of the plot. And her best friend Polly, who she's known since really they were born in the same year, and they lived very close to each other, both in Philadelphia and on Fellowship Point all their lives. Polly agrees with her in principle, but Polly also has a husband and children who have their own opinions and their own interests. So she can't just go along with Agnes as Agnes thinks she should. So there's a lot of, and then the third owner of the land at this point is Agnes's favorite nephew. And he's a complication too. So she thinks that this is a no-brainer to get a land trust to come in at this point. As it turns out, there's a lot of opposition and roadblocks for her.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for your patience with me. Go ahead. You had something you wanted to say.
Yes, I did. So the two characters, Polly and Agnes, my question is about, so Polly, she's married, and so are so many women. So there are so many different ways to write the married woman, but being single in those days as today, it's so unusual. It's such a rare thing. And so how were you ever concerned that this is just going to be a stereotype or a trope of the single woman, because it is such a rare condition that you had to find some way to develop her so she wasn't falling into that trap, that she would be something besides type?
No, I didn't worry about that. I guess I just knew so many single women when I was growing up. And, I always felt that their lives were just as rich, if not more so, than all the married women I knew. Like my godmother was a single woman, and my grandmother's aunts, who I knew when I was little, they were sisters. They lived together their whole lives. A lot of the teachers at my school were single women. As it turned out, they weren't. Some of them turned out to be gay, and that was just not known. But they were presented as if, they were living together maybe as friends. That wasn't really true, but we didn't know that then. So I guess I wasn't, I don't know. I wanted to give her full humanity, but that's how I feel about all the characters. But I wasn't really worried about making her a stereotype. You're actually worrying me by saying that. Like, I hope, I didn't want her to come off that way. I think I wanted to show her, both of them, that their lives they lived in history. Things happened that Agnes ended up as a single woman. It wasn't a plan. It just happened that happened to be her life path. So I think maybe that's what helped me not worry about creating her as a single woman. It just happened that she was. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
And for Alice, for your benefit, I believe Kathy's coming to us from Montana. Is that right?
Yes,
And,
I'm in Montana.
Susan's from Georgia, and I think Jane, you're from Georgia too, aren't you? Yeah.
Wow, everybody all over the place.
Yeah, and Teresa, you're from Spokane, right? Yeah, okay, everybody's from Spokane otherwise, but just so you know, we have interesting conversations with this group. But,
Yeah, I bet. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
Can I ask a bit of an off the wall question to you, Alice?
Of course.
If you were organizing a dinner party, what writers, quit laughing, Linda, what writers, living or dead, would you like to have at that dinner party?
Wow. There's so many. Let me think. It would so depend on like what I wanted to talk about, or what I wanted to learn from. But I think probably I would choose F. Scott Fitzgerald because I just love his writing so much and just feel that he was so modern. I think his stuff still reads as contemporary, even though it's 100 years old. And I love Alice McDermott as a contemporary writer. I think she's absolutely sublime. So, okay, F. Scott, Alice McDermott, and I was asked this question in the New York Times. They have like a questionnaire, and I picked all writers of the life of Jesus, people, different gospels and testimonies of people who had been very close to that story, as be very interesting to talk to them, like what were your sources, what and to have them talk to each other. So I think something, I'd like to think about this a little more, but I think something like that, I don't know, there's so many people I love so much. Edith Wharton, probably a huge influence on me, someone I've studied very deeply, so I'd love to talk to her. But I'm not sure I'm putting together a good dinner party though in saying these people.
Sounds like
That's
it would be
something I
fascinating.
would have to think about a little more.
And if we had an author of a cookbook, they'd be asking you, what things would you like to have at that dinner?
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm a vegan, so it'd have to be a vegan dinner.
Let's see. Jane, did you have any thoughts so far about what we're discussing? You're muted. There you are.
I haven't had time to read the book. I ordered it, but I have not gotten it or read it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I did wonder what part of Maine you're writing about, though.
It's sort of between, let's say, mid-coast and Mount Desert Island.
So the coast.
Sort of in the maybe Blue Hill area.
Yeah. But the coastal Maine.
Coastal Maine.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's not real.
No. It's made up, but it's in that part. The coast does change as you go further, as they call it, down east, which is toward Canada. They say down east instead of north.
Up north.
So it does change. So the terrain I'm describing is around, a little down east of mid-coast, let's say.
I'm stuck in Georgia now, but I lived in Boston for many years, and my parents had a house in Maine, so I've spent a fair bit of time there, but almost always on the coast. We did go inland some, but mostly on the coast.
Yeah.
So I was curious.
It's very different inland.
Yeah. Like some mosquitoes.
Well, there's that. There's the black flies and the mosquitoes, but
yeah.
So that leaves me out. No mosquitoes.
I know. It's not all summer. It's just like little periods when they come.
I used to daydream about moving to way to northern central Canada and just putting a cabin out there in the woods and living with the bears and, you know, and of course, and having to go once a year, twice a year into town and load up on stuff and bring it out there to the cabin. And then somebody mentioned the mosquitoes. So I looked it up and I went, that did it. I'm not, I'm not sure. I guess they're the size of, you know, horse flies.
Yeah, I know I mean, I agree with your fantasy. I have fantasies like that too, but then you find out the snakes, the mosquitoes, you know, that there's just a lot of stuff that isn't quite as romantic
Yeah.
to contend with in those places. There's some really great books about, I mean, about everywhere, but I've read some about Maine, about people who've done that, you know, in the past, just moved way off the grid and lived that way. It's just constant work, you know, it's just dawn to dusk work just to survive, even though people want that and they like it. But then when I read that, I'm like, well, my vision is more like I'm just writing and taking nice walks, not like working dawn to dusk on surviving.
How about you, Teresa? You had any thoughts?
Yeah, I must say I am only about I started reading it yesterday, so I'm only about 2/3 of the way through the book.
Wow,
But
that's
I really appreciate the different personalities and all the different mini themes and difficulties that came up that they had to deal with, and how their reactions, even over the amount of time that we've read, and the way you constructed the timeline was really interesting to me. I kept going back and looking to see what the title of each chapter was and what the year was. And can you talk a little bit about how I heard you say that you wrote it over a great period of time, but how did you keep that structure going?
Yeah, it took me a while to figure out the timeline. They're really basically two timelines. One is 2000 to 2003, and the other one is 1960 to 1963. So once I had those two times pinned down, it was easier. There are parts in the past, earlier in the past than that, but they aren't really portrayed in the present like those two periods are. But I just kept notes about it, I guess, to keep it all straight. But why did I choose those time periods? I chose the 2000 because I wanted Polly and Agnes to be born around 1920. You know, I wanted them to be young women during the World War II period. It was sort of working backward, and I wanted them to be 80 in the beginning of the book. And then, you know, as it happened, there's a big scene around 9/11, which was kind of an unexpected scene. But I knew when I chose 2000 that I was going to have to somehow deal with that, but I didn't know what it was going to be until I wrote it. So yeah, I mean, I tried to make it clear. The 7 parts of the book, each section has a title, and it's from the Quaker discernment process, how you think through a problem, both in a group and privately. So each of those sections is part of thinking about a problem from beginning to end. And that's kind of how I set it up thematically.
Kathy McLean, did you have something you wanted to say a minute ago?
I wanted to interject earlier. A friend and I used to joke about the mosquitoes in New Orleans, about mosquitoes the size of pterodactyls.
You wouldn't
Which is
notice
a nice
Maine
put
then.
off for me in terms of visiting that whole area down there in the south. Boy, I tell you, between that and the fire ants and the alligators and the snakes, I'm thinking that Spokane is pretty darn nice.
Yeah. I get that.
Yeah, as much as we decry the bit of heat that we've had this summer, it's nothing like most places have been. So, you know, we have to
Kidding.
rejoice in a way here. Joyce, you were going to say something too.
Oh, I lived in Maine for a year too, and I know you didn't open your mouth sometimes because it was just filled with those black bugs.
Yeah.
Oh, now I do have to. I was just this afternoon reading a book about the relationship between humans and seals in Scotland. Just a great book, and I love it. And I got to. There's no bugs in Montana because it's too cold here.
Yeah.
And section, the author says blah blah blah, and we're eating midges. And so I thought that they actually ate bugs. That they actually ate bugs for food. And so I have to stop reading, get on the internet. And if I had just waited until this talk, I would have figured out that what he meant was there were so many midges in Scotland that when you open your mouth, the bugs fly in. But what he was talking about, because there's no bugs here. See what they were eating, yes, he meant it as a metaphor. Maybe he meant it as a simile. They were eating midges, but they weren't eating.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
I don't like shoveling all that snow though. You always have something to compromise.
It's worth it. It's worth it. I love
absolutely.
shoveling snow, and yes.
And if you're careful around here, you don't have fleas on your animals either. That's the really good part about living on this side of the Washington state.
Yeah.
You're on the dry side? Yes, you're on the dry side.
Yeah,
dry and fairly high up because we're getting close to the mountains there in Idaho and Montana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're in kind of you might say we're in sort of a sweet spot because I don't know how familiar you, Alice and Jane are with, and Susan, with the state, but you've got that range, the Cascade Mountains over there. And on the left side, on the west side, you've got just the coast, and it's so moist, so much, the humidity is higher. And then once you get over the Cascades, you go through the center part of the state, and it's just dry land. They even raise dry land wheat, and that's Canada all the way down. Although in the northern part, you do have more treed, foresty areas. And then we get over to Spokane, and we've got this wonderful city with lots of trees, and we're right up against the Idaho border, just about 30 miles from Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. And that's when you get the other mountains, the big range. And so we're kind of in a nice spot.
I've never been there. I was in Seattle once when I was a child, but I have not spent that much time in the West. And when I have been, I've been to Colorado and California, and I love it so much. Every time I'm out, anywhere out there, I just wonder, why don't I live there? Because it's just so spectacularly beautiful.
And I can't think, are you living in Pittsburgh or?
I live in New Jersey.
New Jersey, right, excuse me.
Which is pretty, but it's not spectacular. It's mild.
Well, we do have to remind folks a lot of times, so that there is an eastern side to Washington state, and not everybody lives in Seattle. They tend to forget that there's got to be at least, if there's a west side, there's got to be an east side somewhere.
Yeah.
The big one we have is we are not Washington, D.C. Washington, oh, the capital. No, the other one, up in the left-hand corner.
Right.
Back
I
when I
would
was
like to say that we lived in New Jersey for 4 years, and our very first night there, we were in a motel, and there was a deer right outside our room, and it just totally, okay, New Jersey's nothing like what I thought it was going to be, and it wasn't. It was wonderful. And here in Spokane, our school district, I was a teacher, our school district has camp for 6th graders, but the schools have to be able to pay for it. But in New Jersey, they had camp for 6th graders, and the state sent me for the master's degree in outdoor education. And I thought that was the best thing ever. You never really know about someplace different. And that was a real lesson for me, but I did love New Jersey.
Oh, well, that's nice to hear. It is, because it's kind of the butt of a lot of jokes. But it's actually really beautiful. And I live on a very busy street. But I have a lot of deer. I have raccoon, possum, skunks, big big raptors fly along. There's a ridge. They fly along the ridge. Just so much wildlife in my little yard, partly because I don't discourage them. You know, my neighbors, for example, chase the deer away, but I don't chase the deer away. So they come and sleep in my yard, and they have their babies in my yard. And really, if you could see it, you wouldn't even believe it. It's like you wouldn't even believe that any wildlife would be on this street. But I guess we've used up a lot of their habitat, so they're around.
Yeah.
But it's nice. I like it.
back when I was in high school, we had an exchange student, a couple of them come to our school. And of course, the exchange students from out of country all meet in Washington, D.C. before they go to their orientation. And they didn't know until they got here, apparently, just exactly where they were going to be sent. And the one girl admitted that she had been told she was going to be sent to Spokane. And when she found out it was on the west side of the United States, she was just in terror and tears, because here she thought, here she was going to civilization in the United States, but now she was going to have to learn to ride a horse and shoot a 6-shooter and protect herself from the Indians. And oh, she was just, oh, this was horrible. She was going to go out there and live in the Wild West. She just couldn't. Oh no, same thing as east side of the country.
Yeah, Susan?
We have cars and buses.
I just wanted to comment on the difference between Polly and Agnes in regard to Dick. And I think that was an interesting name that you gave him, because he fit it so well. And I think that the theme that was underneath that was that the feminism, it was very, very hard to read. And I was so grateful when you did something about Dick, because that was just like, thank goodness, And so that was probably the most maddening part for me of reading the book, is like, oh no, not again. But I thought it was great. I mean, you did a very awesome job on it, and I didn't have any problem with that piece. I just, and I think that's the beauty of an author being able to speak to the people that are reading it, that, you could upset people, you could delight people, you can do any number of things. And, if you make somebody angry, so what, so I wasn't angry at you. I just didn't like him.
Well, he's like a challenging character for sure. And I actually really like him, but I have sympathy for him. My feeling about him was right from the moment she married him. She was like 21 years old. She was very young, and he had like a lot of attractive qualities for her, but she didn't really understand that he was a very average person and that she was an above average person. She didn't really feel that way about herself. But you know, this turned out to be the case. And when he had like an early career failure with his work, he just was not the person who could ever rise above that, you know. And I think that's true of many people. Like they don't have the resilience or the wherewithal to reinvent themselves. I mean, we constantly see stories of people reinventing themselves and picking themselves up, and you know, not everybody does that. Not everybody does that, you know. It's just it takes a lot to do that. And he just is just an average person who he had like a big idea and it didn't work out, and that was kind of embittering to him. And he was also a person of his era in terms of his sexism. It wasn't anything, but that was a man of his times who didn't see through it. I mean, I think there are always people who see through their time and live a little out of history, and then most people live in history and are just living according to the mores of their era. So I didn't really blame him for that, but yes, I was very happy when Polly had opportunities to be.
Hi there. I'm pretty good. Thanks.
I don't know what happened there. My Siri just started talking, but I don't know why. I must have said something.
Well,
but,
it's 3 o'clock.
Yeah. So I wrote those parts when Polly's talking to him in the early mornings when he kind of has his guard down at the end of his life. That made me much more sympathetic towards him. You know, that he had a lot of experiences and thoughts that he never really expressed. But yes, as I was very frustrated, as Agnes was, by Polly's sort of making herself small in order to make him big.
Well, we're almost out of time, if that's a concern to anyone. Any last minute thoughts of anyone wants to share?
Well, your
I
book
love
sounds,
that their office has so many books, Alice.
Oh, I know, isn't that ridiculous? Those are all my books. That's my to read pile. I just buy books and then I don't read them. So they're just sitting there waiting.
I have a to read pile in the bedroom, a to read pile in the living room, and a to read pile almost in fact, in the kitchen underneath my table. So yeah, I understand that part.
Thank you. Because it looks a little crazy. I was thinking today I better put all those away before this Zoom. But then I thought,
Yeah.
well, I didn't think differently. I just didn't have time. So I'm glad you're not upset by it.
You're talking to a bunch of what do they call them? Book of files.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to mind a bunch of books.
right.
I was thinking if that's just the size of your to be read pile, you're a slacker.
Okay, I have another 2 piles downstairs, if that makes you feel better.
Okay.
If this is a competition, Susan's heard this before, but I've made furniture and walls out of books in my house.
Wow.
We have them stacked every place there's floor space that we walk between everything around it.
Yep.
And I'm trying desperately right now to go through books and give them away. So
Good.
yeah, because you know, I'm one of those things. If we have an earthquake in my bedroom, all this is going to fall on me while I'm in bed. So I'm in trouble.
Yeah, that does not sound very safe. Sorry, but
No, but the books are also wonderful. It's so hard. I've been teaching myself lately saying, look, you have a wonderful book and it's sitting here. Why don't you let somebody read it who might get something out of it? Because that's what books are for. They're not made
yeah,
meant to
that's
be
what
furniture.
I was having the same problem getting rid of some of these. And a friend of mine said, well, you supported the author by buying it, so you've done your part.
Yeah.
And if you can't read it, you can just move it on to someone else.
There
So
you
that
go.
made me feel better. That made me feel like, okay, I had done something good rather than something bad by not reading it.
Yeah. Well, I have a
Right,
little
so
talk with
some of
them and I explain that I'm going to pass it to someone who's going to love it and want to read it, and it won't have to sit buried in the bathroom anymore.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Have a little conversation. Yeah. I'm gonna
But I
take that up.
suggest some of these elderly homes where some of the retirees are, they have lots of times, they have more time to read it than some of the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
they have less
know.
access to them.
They don't always want the books though.
Yeah.
You know, you would think,
Well,
but
you need to check first, but
A lot of mine are being delivered for me to these little libraries all over town. So that's what. Well, folks, I got one more thing to say, and that is I have just a very, very few signed book plates. If you have a book and you would like one, I can give them to the first people, probably up to 4 people who ask for one. And then if I run out, I will try to see if I can get more from Alice's friend at the publishing house. Maybe she'll arrange that. But I will need your address so that I can mail it to you. And just, you know how to write me. You've got my email, so okay.
Yep.
And, it's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. It was really nice.
You did a wonderful,
thank you
wonderful
for the
presentation.
time.
It's been a fun conversation. It wasn't one of those webinar things, you know.
No, it's very nice and relaxed.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time for us.
No,